Welcome in, everybody. You're watching the Makeshift Managers podcast, and I know what you're thinking. Holy crap, Austin, you look different. Well, Austin isn't here this week. It's actually Devin going solo with our buddy Aaron at Fantasy Football Mad Scientist. Welcome back on the show, Aaron. How's your day going?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me. Got to work with Austin last time. I'll check in with you this time.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. And as for all the listeners that can actually read, we're going over this year's top five at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. There shouldn't be a whole lot of surprises on this show. This draft class really has a lot of really good talent near the top, and then you can kind of pull straws or find needles and haystacks in the later rounds with some of these prospects. But I'm excited to talk prospects. The draft's my favorite time of the year, so I'm ready to get into it if you are, Aaron.
I am, yeah. A lot of depth, not a whole lot of high-end talent here. There's one or two at each position, and then a big cluster of guys all in the same value. So the NFL draft, I think, is going to be more important than ever before.
Yes, 100%. And so starting off, we're going to be looking at quarterbacks. And so this is
pretty much agree here on the quarterbacks.
Yeah. And so, okay.
That didn't load the way it was supposed to.
Let's go ahead and try this again. Bear with us, my friends. So back to sharing the screen. And if this doesn't work, I might just go spoken word. And once again, we are nope. Well, this is what we're going to have to do. The banner.
I don't know. Will it let me share with you? Because you're
That's we had the overlay on. The overlay was cutting it off. The beauty of technology. So here's the list.
There you go. You worked out.
In full HD. So as we can see, there's not a whole lot of differences in terms of who we view as top five talents, but there is a little bit of like fluctuation between 1 through 4 between you and I, Aaron. So I'll let you start off with Bryce Young. Let's
There's a little bit of fluctuation in general with me. Like I said, I made up these top. I don't really have rankings. I don't like doing, especially rookie. I don't really like doing these rankings before the NFL draft in general. So I had to kind of spitball and go through. You just find I rewrite them completely once the draft comes out. As I said earlier, these are my top 5 quarterbacks right now. I feel like they're pretty set. The order could change in any shape or fashion come draft time once we see capital and landing spot. Bryce Young's at 1. He could be 4. Richardson's at 4. Could be 1. I'm personally high on Will Levis. The only thing I can seem to agree on is that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud always seem to fall as 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B for me. They're kind of one and the same. Whereas Levis and Richardson they fluctuate for me. Depends on, what kind of mood I'm in. I think they're both the high risk, high reward. So if I'm in a risky mood, I put one of them at the top. If I want to go safe, like I did apparently on this one, I go with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. So it'll probably change by the time this show's over, and I'll have a new top 5. So,
yeah, I think for me, a big portion of my rankings, just on paper until the draft is done, I'm just looking at guys that I think are going to be best suited for the NFL's game. And in terms of dynasty rankings, I think Stroud and Young are probably near the top of my list for dynasty quarterbacks. Depending on your roster, I would also say Anthony Richardson shouldn't be anything to shake a stick at. I think he's going to translate pretty well at the NFL level, especially if he's in the correct situation.
Yeah.
I like Stroud over Young for the sole fact that Stroud's just bigger. And historically speaking, we haven't seen a guy of Bryce Young's size play at that elite level, even in fantasy, besides maybe a Drew Brees. But I don't think Brees and Young are like an accurate comparison. And so it would take, at least for me, a bit of time. And just I need to see him do it over time in order for me to take a guy like Young over CJ Stroud currently.
Bryce Young seems to have that's the comp I settled on with him. I don't know, like a shorter version of Drew Brees, not ultra athletic, but enough to get by. For me, CJ Stroud's by far the most accurate. I find Bryce Young to be the most intelligent and best at reading the game. Levis is your prototypical Big Ben, stocky prototype quarterback, and Richardson is your new age mobile threat QB. So it's
Mhm.
funny, 4 quarterbacks, each one of them I really goes about it in a different way. The way Young is, I get everyone's worried about his size, but for me, I have Young at 1. Just he seems to process the game the best, but it's close with Stroud because Stroud's accuracy is just unmatched. So that's why I flip flop between the two of them. I could easily take Stroud over Young. Landing spot will probably, be very dependent. Right now, it seems like Young is who Carolina's going with, which would make him Bryce Young my easy one because I love that landing spot in Carolina, as opposed to whoever slips to number 2 and goes to the Texans. If the Texans draft one, they're probably going to slip to my 3 or 4 because I don't like that situation. A rookie quarterback going to a team with a bad offense, bad team all around, with a rookie coach and a coach that was a former defensive coordinator. They don't tend to typically produce very well for fantasy teams. So, like I said, Bryce Young, I'm assuming right now he's the 101 to Carolina. Smartest quarterback. That's why he's my 101.
You make great points in the argument for Bryce Young over CJ Stroud. I do think the draft location for the top 2 is going to be the biggest determining factor because I think for me, they've cemented themselves through their collegiate play as the 2 prospects in this year's quarterback class. And granted, if it were next year, there's a definitive 1 in that quarterback class that everyone's going to be clamoring over.
Yeah.
But I do agree in Carolina probably being the better situation year 1 for any of these rookies to go to just because of the situation that Carolina is in. They're in a terrible division, and they're honestly trying to play to win right now. Every move this offseason has been a team that's trying to be an NFL roster that is competent in a division where everybody's kind of aging out or kind of clinging to a window that they had in the past and are trying to prolong. So Carolina, congratulations to whomever you draft. They will probably be a solid option in Superflex. And I would not hate either of them in Carolina. The number 12 pick for me complicates Houston because if you can draft a guy at 2, whether it be Stroud or Young, and then you get them an elite option like a JSN at the number 12 spot, it kind of helps my thought process with that. But I would need them to get that playmaker for their quarterback going into year 1.
Rookie coach, like I said, defensive coordinator is the scary one for me there. Actually, you know what? I don't think he's going to go at 101, but the best landing spot for Anthony Richardson would be Carolina.
Yep.
I think Frank Reich is the coach who would get the most out of him. I just don't see him going that high. It's going to be Stroud or Young. If Stroud is the 101 to Carolina, he'd be my 101 or 102, I guess, in Superflex drafts. But Frank Reich, that's, the difference maker for me. He seems to be the QB whisperer. So Bryce Young goes there. That's who I'm taking.
And then now we're going to go into Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. Realistically, for me, the Anthony Richardson and Will Levis thing, it's closer than I'd like to admit in terms of overall production at the college level. I just think the biggest thing leaning Richardson's way is just how much of a freak athlete he is. He's done nothing but win since the season wrapped. Like, he put together the single most dominant combine run for a quarterback we've ever seen. He was just destroying what felt like record after record. But Levis's profile, he's 6'3", 222 pounds with a rocket for an arm. Looking at the raw data, his completion percentage isn't terrible.
For who?
For Levis. He's in the
Levis, wasn't he high 60s, mid to high 60s? I thought he was higher than most of them.
No, yeah. So he's at 64.9 for his career. Richardson definitely has the most question marks with his accuracy, but for fantasy purposes, the biggest thing about Anthony Richardson is going to be his legs.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
No, and with Richardson, as you were saying previously, that's one where I've kind of come around on him a bit. I know they're going to say he's 53.9% accuracy. I don't think that necessarily tells the tale of the tape for him. Florida runs a low pass volume, deep threat offense. So if he's throwing 25 passes a game and 12 of them are 25 yards downfield, you're going to naturally have a lower completion percentage. So it depends on which side of devil's advocate you want to be for Richardson. You could say he has a terrible terrible completion percentage, and that we're over buying or buying into the hype from the pro day throwing session, just like we did with Zach Wilson, and that he's going to be a bust. Or you could look into it and say he has a high rushing floor and that his inaccuracies may be overblown based on the offense he ran. It's really, that's the hard part about this quarterback class. Like I said, there's not a Trevor Lawrence, a Joe Burrow. There are 4 quarterbacks that have their strength and their weakness, and you just kind of pick what you want. I always lean Will Levis over Richardson because I'm a prototypical QB pocket passer build, and that's where I always lean to. Whereas you got the guys who love their mobile Jalen Hurts type, they'll take Richardson every time. So
yeah, I feel like out of this class, Richardson is the longest play out of any of the quarterbacks that you can get in a super flex draft, especially if you're taking him high. Because I think Richardson's best case scenario is he gets drafted to a team where he could sit for a year, possibly. I think if he can learn the NFL game and get the reps through practice, playing against scout defenses, and just learning behind somebody, I think there's something that can be unlocked with Richardson. I have to agree that I think Will Levis is more NFL ready. And I think that's going to be a plus in dynasty drafts whenever you're looking for that super flex position to fill. While Levis does not have the legs of an Anthony Richardson, his arm is going to be talented enough to at least give you middling quarterback numbers. He'll be a QB2 weekly, I'm assuming, depending on the offense that he's drafted into. Because unlike Zach Wilson, he's a big dude. He fits the bill of NFL starting quarterback. There's no 6 foot, 215 pounds. Like he is cookie cutter, essentially. There's a reason why people are like, well, Josh Allen's this huge hulking dude with a cannon arm, and he had to figure out kind of as he came into the NFL. Levis is not a finished product, and I think whoever's drafting him is going to have to mold a little bit of what his game is going to be as an NFL starter.
I see Stroud and Young likely starters from week 1. I think Richardson and Hooker are probably going to need to sit. Well, Hooker more so because of the injury. But I think Richardson and Hooker should sit for a year to develop. Will Levis is the one where I don't know. I think he'd benefit from sitting for a while, but if he goes to a spot like Vegas, if he manages to creep into the top 10, Vegas or something like that, I could see him starting week 1, and from there, it's just a matter of does he hit or does he miss. But this even like you'll go down to Hooker here. It's the whole quarterback class. You just have to decide which narrative you want for each player. Like Hooker, do you buy into that? It was just him throwing to a bunch of speedy receivers that nobody could cover, and that he's not really good, and that he only plays a spread offense and he won't adapt to a pro style offense, and that he's 25, blah, 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 etc. Or do you buy into the talent and that, I think if he wasn't injured, he would probably be the number 3 in this class. So all 5 have a case for, the angel or the devil on your shoulder. I find this is the time of year for these 5 where if one of them is your guy, you're just going to play devil's advocate and not be convinced. And really, there is no right or wrong answer until we see where they go.
Yeah, 100%. I actually really like Hendon Hooker in this class, especially for like dynasty draft purposes. He is the oldest of these quarterbacks by a wide margin, being 25 years old coming into the draft. If he is taken in, I believe, the first round, he'll be like the oldest quarterback since Brandon Weeden, who was 28. So it's going to be, if he's taken in the first round, it'll be a historic moment for aging quarterbacks in their rookie years.
He could go to New Orleans, I think, at the end of the first.
Wherever Hooker goes, I'm going to be a fan of it because he is 25 years old, but quarterbacks play until they're in their late 30s, almost on average nowadays. It just feels that way with the way that the game has changed and shifted with the rules protecting quarterbacks. Because Hendon Hooker versus Stetson Bennett, there's a mile of difference between the two quarterbacks at the same age.
This is going to sound like hedging my bet, but I agree. Like I agree with all that. It's going to sound like I'm hedging my bet here, but if I don't have one QB I'm targeting in drafts. What I would like is I play in so many leagues. I think I'm going to just try and acquire at least one share of all 5 of these at some point, and just, hope that the one I end up with the most, who is the best value, is the one that hits. Cause I don't really have a definitive, opinion on which one is going to, if you told me 5 years from now that Stroud was the bust, I'd believe you. If you told me that he was the Pro Bowl quarterback, I'd also believe you. And same goes for all of them. I think maybe the ceiling's lowest for Hooker, but the rest of them, it's such a wide range of outcomes. I think I'm just going to try and have a diverse portfolio here and have some exposure to all 5.
I do feel that Hendon Hooker's floor immediately is probably one of the safest out of this class, depending on how he recovers from the injury, because he's going to go to the best situation out of all 5 of these quarterbacks, theoretically, based upon where he's being drafted and at the value that teams are going to view, because he's possibly a late first rounder, more than likely second rounder, mid-second rounder, depending on team need. And so for me, with Hooker, he's going to have arguably better weapons than anybody else coming out of this draft. And he can throw the ball. The things he was doing at Tennessee this year, I think, are the truth. Like, I watched some Tennessee games this year. His stats back up the claims. He had almost a 70% completion percentage this year. Career completion percentage of 66.9 at Tennessee, playing in the SEC, the same conference of Will Levis. And especially in fantasy drafts and Superflex, I would much rather be able to get one of the top skill position guys in this year's draft and hedge my bet with a Hendon Hooker at my Superflex spot or my backup quarterback spot. Because
sorry, go ahead. I thought
you're good. I was just
going to go off. Go ahead.
Because essentially for me, a big deal for my fantasy drafts, I haven't done a whole lot of dynasty leagues, but in my redraft leagues year over year, I find myself saying, I want to try and get the best return on value that I can. I will price players throughout certain rounds, and if I feel I'm in too deep in this round, I'll wait. Like Chris Godwin was a huge guy for me last year. I'm like, I feel like his value is lower than it should be coming off of this injury. And so the Chris Godwins of the world, even Jalen Waddle last year, I thought Jalen Waddle was criminally underrated because of the Jamar Chase boom the year prior. Waddle was right behind him. He was just missing in like big plays and touchdowns. So for me, Hendon Hooker is completely attractive in any draft format because of the value he's going to have. He's a rookie going into arguably one of the best situations in the draft, and I believe the talent is on par with at least Richardson and Levis and could even be on that level of Stroud and Bryce Young.
See, for me, Hooker, and that's exactly what you said. The value is why I'm softening a bit on him. When I've done a million of these 5-round rookie startup mock drafts, and when we first started the process, Hooker was going mid-third, end of the third, then he crept up to the end of the second. I was getting a Hooker anywhere between 206 and 306. Now he's going in the first 3 picks of the second round. I've even seen a few where he's creeping up to the 111, 112. And that's where suddenly I think Hooker's value, it's like Zay Flowers. Flowers has really skyrocketed, and they're creeping up to a point where they're no longer really a value. You have to be taking Hooker now. You're taking him at the tail end of the first round of rookie drafts. You've really got to be in on him at that price, as you know, to pass up a Zach Charbonnet. I mean, or you're desperate at quarterback.
Yeah. Hendon Hooker is going to be the case study of this draft, especially in dynasty formats, because either you're without a paddle at quarterback and all the other ones have gone, because he's going to be the flag plant at the position. You are going to see him go either pretty high comparatively to where he should be going, or teams are just going to punt and say, I don't trust him, I don't believe in him, and I think the injury is going to play a factor.
Yeah, for sure.
And so this is leading me into talking about, I think, it's probably my favorite position group, because I think we talked about it before we started up. Running back this year is
2 guys and then a cluster.
It's 2 guys and then a cluster, and clusters are probably my favorite thing to talk about whenever it comes to fantasy football, because that's all this is. We're literally just looking at different tiers of player and planting our flag and who we think is either going to outperform their tier or not regress out of their tier. Bijan Robinson is in the tier of his own. It's Bijan and everybody else. If you have the 101, congratulations. You're either getting Bijan or a haul of picks.
I think Gibbs is in a tier of his own after that as well.
Yep. I would have to agree as well. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the most tantalizing prospect outside of Bijan. Yeah, I think his floor is going to be incredibly safe, especially with the skill set that he possesses.
And then for me, I find so Bijan tier, Gibbs tier. Then I'm flip-flopping back and forth between Roshan and Charbonnet. And then, like I said, my 4 are set in flip-flop 3 and 4. But once I get to 5, I told you, I went with Kendre Miller. This could have been Tank Bigsby. It could have been Tyjae Spears. It could have been Sean Tucker. There was probably 6 running backs that I could have put in at 5, and I just happened to go with Kendre Miller, and this was printed up probably 4 hours ago, and even now I'm not sure if I want Kendre as my 5. It could be Tyjae Spears. There's 4, I think, that are in a class of, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then tier everybody else.
Yeah. A big thing for me, the comps that Jahmyr Gibbs has been getting to, like Alvin Kamara, I think are warranted, and I actually really enjoy them.
He's too small, though.
He is too small, but I love his balance at the running back position. I think he is going to be dangerous wherever he goes, and I feel like his skill set is going to kind of allow him to mold to whatever team drafts him. I feel like his floor is just baked into his skill set.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of backs in this draft. Depending on where Charbonnet goes, I'm not super confident in how much I'm going to want him in my leagues. I think he's going to be a good running back for a number of teams, but I do feel that his upside is limited because I don't see him in a receiving role. I think he's going to be getting maybe first and second downs or splitting first through third. It's going to be a timeshare with Zach Charbonnet. There's going to be that change of pace back that's going to be in passing situations and stuff like that. If he can block, it'll be better for him.
Yeah, Bijan and Gibbs. Bijan, I think, and Gibbs both are the safest. They go round 1 in the NFL draft. Then I think Roshan and Zach Charbonnet are probably pretty well-rounded. Charbonnet not as good of a pass catcher. They probably go day 2. I think they both go earlier than anyone expects. And then I think you're going to see maybe 1 or 2 more sneak into round 2, and then a handful go into round 3. And that's where we're going to start to fill out the grouping of 5 to 10 or 5 to 12 is going to be just whoever gets the best draft capital after what we'll call the Charbonnet line. I know you have Roshan a little lower, but I think you're going to be surprised how high Roshan goes in the draft.
In the draft, I think Roshan will probably end up going before even a Tyjae Spears. I think Roshan Johnson's one of my favorite prospects at running back because of the special case that he presents. He is an incredibly efficient runner, and if I'm correct, his profile is like he's like 6'2" something, like
215 maybe. He's a big boy.
He's a big dude, 6'2", 223 pounds.
Oh, he's bigger than I thought.
I don't think there's a single back in this draft that I would say I like the build more than Roshan Johnson, and he has arguably the least amount of mileage on his frame.
Yeah.
And the only reason he was not putting up 100 plus carries per season, almost 200 carries per season, is because of the man Bijan Robinson up top. Because that's the biggest thing with running backs. They all have a timer, and a lot of them don't even see big money past their first contracts. Roshan Johnson has this really interesting combination of hyper efficiency per carry, touchdown equity, and lack of mileage at the college level. Because this is a guy that's coming out of college with less than 400 carries. And a big thing for me over the last couple of years in my analysis of running backs year over year whenever I'm drafting is there's a certain threshold. Once you get past a certain number of carries in your career, college plus the pros, there is a definitive slope downward. It's just inevitable. And if I can get a guy that has – so Bijan has 539 carries on his career. That's reps on the body. And the body always breaks down, especially at a position like running back. You're literally getting into car accidents every single week of your playing year. And even looking at Roshan Johnson, he wasn't just scoring rushing touchdowns. He had 26 receiving touchdowns in his entire career. He had more receiving touchdowns than he had rushing touchdowns at Texas. I think he's going to be probably he's going to produce at the NFL level. There's no way he gets drafted somewhere and he's not a part of that backfield. The build's crazy. The mileage is there, and he's going to be useful at receiving and also in the rushing attack. I totally agree with Roshan Johnson. I think he's going to go higher than we expect. I think
he goes second running back off the board in the NFL draft. I think he goes higher than Gibbs. That's what I've heard. I've heard a lot of they love him. I know everyone says, why didn't he transfer out of Texas? I've said the same thing, but it sounds like Bijan was the star of that team, but it sounds like Roshan was the heart of that team and is a real character guy, and they love the size and speed. Like, it's not elite speed, but I don't know if he does pass Gibbs, but I think he's pretty safely the third running back off the board.
Yeah, I like Roshan more than Charbonnet, but Charbonnet just has the production. And for me, I feel like Roshan's going to be a question because can he carry that load? I don't think it should be a question with his build. I just think he's as can't miss as it can really get outside of Bijan in terms of like efficiency, size, everything you want out of a running back. Gibbs is the special case because of his size. He's a little undersized. Yeah. But we've seen through the last 5 years in fantasy that you don't have to be the biggest back to actually produce. We've got case studies in Austin Eckler. Kamara's been good. Kamara's a bit bigger. Eckler's more muscular than Gibbs. But, yeah, Roshan Johnson is going to be, I think, my flag. I'll probably plant my flag, especially in redraft. If there's one rookie running back I'm going to target, it's probably Roshan Johnson. Because unless you're in leagues where people are really, really invested in rookies, I think Johnson's going to be a name that people kind of forget, especially with the Bijan hype.
Nobody's not like the guys in my work league. That's my main dynasty. I send them out stuff on Roshan every day. Nobody, like, literally, I'm the Roshan guy, and half the time they don't even know. And I've just been touting them all off season. But I think our fifth guy, well, your fourth guy and my fifth guy are the kind of the scary ones. I think they both have. Like, Tajay was the belle of the ball at the Senior Bowl, and Kendre had a great season. I think that they both had the same concern for me. Tajay's nursing a knee injury, and Kendre, I don't know what injury he had, but he hasn't done any of the testing. And the thing that worries me is right now they're in our top 5. Is the NFL really going to overreact to that injury, and could they fall out of day 2? If either one of the two falls out of day 2, for me, because of injury concern, they'll be off my top 5.
Yeah, I think that's a fair. That is definitely fair. Tajay for me is electric. I just think as a runner, he's one of the more exciting prospects in this class. And granted, he was playing in the American Conference, but to go out there and do what he did at the Senior Bowl, it's impressive. There's no other way to like constitute it. And he was efficient every year in college. His sophomore year, he didn't have the attempts to really back up his efficiency because he averaged 7.4 on 37 carries, but he put up back-to-back years of 100-plus carries and over 6 yards a carry. And he really kind of silenced any doubt for me in this last season at Tulane, putting up almost 1,600. He put up 1,800-plus all-purpose yards, and he had 43 touchdowns in total last year. Like, maybe he doesn't translate at the NFL level, but if there's one guy that I'm willing to like throw the dart and say, I think the talent is going to be there. I think as a runner, he's exciting enough to where he could possibly break out of a backfield. I think Spears is the guy for me. Yeah. Obviously, he's not going to have the capital or the immediate role of a Bijan or even a Jahmyr Gibbs. But out of the guys outside of Bijan, Jahmyr, and Roshan, I think Spears is right in that threshold of a guy that I think could be a league winner if things pan out in this situation because of the talent that we've seen.
Yeah, like I said earlier, 5 to 10, 5 to 12. It's all going to be dependent on which one of these guys gets the best landing spot and the draft capital, because there seems to be a pretty solid consensus forming here between Robinson, Gibbs, and then the mixture of Charbonnet and Johnson. But after that, it's Spears, Miller, Bigsby, Tucker, Evans, A-Chain. Like, there's probably 8 of them. I'm sure I forgot somebody else that could go easily into this. I've got guys who are 12 right now who could move up to 5. Like, I've got Kendre Miller's 5 could be down to 10, in, 10 days, 9 days. Mm-hmm. So it's, we're really going to see a lot here in 9 days. Bless you.
Yeah. So
I love Roshan, though. I'm tempted to put him up to number 2, but I don't want to look like a total lunatic because I realize Gibbs is probably more likely to get the draft capital and safer. But Charbonnet, I don't think I'm ever moving him up from 4. I'm a Michigan fan, and I'm tainted from his time at Michigan. I get Jim Harbaugh probably ruined him because that's what Harbaugh does. He has that effect, but I don't know. There's just something about Charbonnet.
I feel
I'm lower on him than consensus.
I would have to agree with the Zach Charbonnet take. I get it. For me, a lot of the time, the UCLA skill dudes that can just never fully get around to it. I feel like their defenders tend to be better at the NFL level than their skill guys and their offensive weapons.
Chip
Charbonnet,
Kelly.
yeah.
Yeah, his offensive guys tend to pile up accumulation stats and then don't really carry over into the NFL.
And this is coming from a Chargers fan, so I'm fresh off of the Joshua Kelly stuff. It's like, and Joshua Kelly's a fun case because Austin Eckler is a world beater, but I think Charbonnet is going to be in a backfield somewhere, but I don't think Charbonnet is ever going to own a backfield. No. I feel like the other four have, at least the top two, could do it. Bijan could do it immediately. Jameer has a really good shot to own a backfield. And Tyjae and Roschon, I think they have higher shots of owning a backfield than Zach.
I think Kendre has a higher shot than Zach. I mean, I get there's flaws in his profile, but I think that if he wasn't nursing an injury, I forget what it was. Do you remember? It went out against Michigan, and I watched the game. I can't remember if it's an ankle. It's something lower body. So I feel like if he was healthy and done all the testing, I think he would be our consensus number 5 because he's very solid, but we're going to see just how bad that injury is.
And a big thing for Jameer as well, and one reason why I like him in Dynasty is he's the youngest back of merit in this class. He's
20?
He's 20. He just turned 21, if I'm correct.
Okay.
So Bijan's like 2 months older, and then Charbonnet is a full year and 2 months. Kendre Miller is actually not even 21 years old yet.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, running back's going to be fun. Running back's the hardest position to actually grade out.
He chased Zach Evans out. That's what I loved. He just Zach Evans was the biggest recruit, highest recruit coming out of high school, transfer or went to TCU and got run right out of town by Kendre Miller. So,
and now we're gonna get into
wide receiver, another one where there's probably a consensus 4, and then just flip a coin.
This is probably the scariest position group in all of the draft. I think receiver is absolutely terrifying for the sole purpose.
I have JSN pretty solidly at number 1. He scares me. It could be a bust. After that, I didn't know who to put at 2. I don't know. It could be Zay. It could be Quentin for me. I think Addison is pretty firmly in 4th for me. Yeah. Tillman was another one. Like the same with the running backs. When we get to 5, I have a group of players from 5 to 10, 5 to 12 that, depending on landing spot and draft capital, could all move up. I don't think it's as deep as running back. Like if I look at the list, it's probably Tillman, Hyatt, Downs, Marvin Mims, Jonathan Mingo. Like there's maybe 4 or 5 that could fall into my 5. Sorry,
Jonathan Mingo, just based upon build, skill set, and just like what I project him to be at the NFL level, he could be top 5 for me on this list.
That's what I mean. I considered him.
Like Mingo for me, like as a Chargers fan, I would love if the Chargers could get a guy like Jonathan Mingo in like possibly the 2nd round, because 6'2", 215. His comp is AJ Brown, and if you think that's weird, I don't know what else to tell you. Like
no. He's
Ole Miss prospect, absolute freak athlete. He's quick, he's strong. It's what you want based upon what we've seen in fantasy over the last couple of years. Guys like Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown last year. The stronger receivers tend to be pretty damn good at fantasy because they don't just win off the line. They can win through the catch point. For me, JSN's the number 1 guy in this class. I don't
2 through 10, I think, is going to change because I think there's so many guys who profile to be this or that. I think the NFL draft, what teams do is going to show us how they feel about them. And that for me is going to move them up or down because, if a team drafts Zay Flowers or Addison lower, they clearly think he's only a slot guy. I think Cedric Tillman could go earlier than expected because of his size and speed. And that's why I have him over Hyatt. Quentin Johnston, everyone hates him. I'm a prototypical alpha receiver lover there. I always say he's Julio Jones light or he's T. Higgins. I think he has the widest range of outcomes. He could be an absolute top 5 receiver stud, or he could be N'Keal Harry out of the league. I'm always, besides Jackson Smith and Jigba, who seems to be the safest, I'm just always going to lean towards the size and speed with Johnston, and that's why he's my 2.
The biggest thing for me and Quentin Johnston is
Hands or route running, which one do you hate? It's always one of the two when someone complains about him.
I don't necessarily hate either. He was the number one option on a team that almost won a national championship this year. That speaks to something. He was playing against really good competition, especially through the playoff, and he was producing. At his size, there's only so many outcomes for players of this mold.
Yeah.
At his best, I would love for him to become like a Mike Evans type. But at his worst, he could be the next Mike Williams. And I'm not saying he would become that, but these big X receivers where I think he's going to be dominant at the catch point and he's going to be an absolute monster in the red zone. Depending on where he's drafted, his fit is going to fluctuate, or his value is going to fluctuate tremendously.
I think he's going to go early with JSN to, as we talked about earlier, I think one of them might go to Tennessee. One of them goes to Houston.
If Johnston's in Tennessee, I just can't see myself putting the value in him. If JSN's in Tennessee, I'm a bit more confident in JSN consistently providing fantasy value. Yeah. Johnston,
the Houston landing spot, we talked about it with quarterback. Mm-hmm. That landing spot, I think, hurts any of the skill positions that go to Houston. I think take a downgrade.
Yeah, but for me, because for Houston, I think if Houston is smart, they are getting a quarterback in this draft, unless they say, we are bad. We will be bad this year. Let's go get Caleb Williams, which is a hell of
possibility.
It's a hell of a bet to make.
I've heard they're going. Was it not Jalen Carter or
Anderson?
Will Anderson at 2, and then possibly a receiver at 12. So I didn't think that either. I assumed they were going to go quarterback, wide receiver, but I'm hearing it could be defense, wide receiver, unless Levis or Richardson falls to 12. Which I don't think will happen. I think that the possibility that they pass on one of these quarterbacks and wait and tank for Caleb Williams, I think it's a higher likelihood than anyone realizes.
I honestly feel like the Texans are probably a bit better off kind of doing that, because the biggest thing is you want the shot at Caleb Williams, and I think they have a definitive shot to get Caleb. Yeah. And if you don't get Caleb, you have a real shot at Drake May, as long as you're within that top 5 range of picks. And Drake May isn't a terrible consolation prize. I think looking at Drake May's body of work, he's comparable to this top 4 flurry of quarterbacks. Would he be over Young or Stroud? I'm not entirely sold at this point. If he puts out another year where he's in the Heisman contention, leading Carolina to wins, it's going to be a conversation looking back on it.
I agree.
Whoever goes first receiver off the board, if it's going to be to Tennessee, that really sucks, and I feel terrible about it. I'm going to side with the guy that goes to Houston.
Yeah.
Like immediately, because even with Davis Mills being the starting quarterback, I think I trust him more than a Ryan Tannehill, and especially a Malik Willis going into this year. Tennessee, outside of Derrick Henry, is just an anemic offensive situation that is just not going to get better. They fire-saled most of their star talent besides Jeffrey Simmons during this offseason, so they're more in line for a rebuild than a retool anyways. So whoever goes to Tennessee, I'm not saying you don't take them in your dynasty leagues, but you're not going to be looking at some form of a league winner like you think you might, because it's going to create a cabinet of receivers that I genuinely do like. You're going to have Treylon Burks. You're going to have, I forget the name of the tight end that kind of broke out last year. He was a rookie.
Chigo Conquo.
Yes, that is the name. So you'd have Johnson or JSN. You would have Burks. You would have the tight end. Nick Westbrook-Akine is not my favorite weapon in the league, but as a wide receiver 3, he can be passable. They're going to have weapons enough to actually be able to move the ball. Theoretically. Depends on the quarterback, but
I could see them being a sneaky shot at 11 for a quarterback if Levis or Richardson happen to fall there. I don't think they'd take Hooker, but
no, I think Levis screams Tennessee Titan if he falls, personally.
Oh, I hate that.
No, trust me, I don't like it either. I feel like Tennessee, if they're going to try and get a quarterback, I just feel like Vrabel would probably like Levis over Richardson. But JSN, anywhere he's going, out of all the receivers in this class, I want Jackson Smith, point blank. Everybody else, depending on fit, I would love to have them. I think Zay Flowers is a bit fit-proof compared to Quentin Johnston, just based upon the skill sets. I think you can work Zay Flowers into a lot of NFL offenses today, just based upon his change of direction and shiftiness. I like his hands. I think he's probably the most dynamic receiver, as opposed to JSN, who I think is just the most consistent weapon. Because JSN can do basically everything. And I think Zay Flowers has a little bit of that in his game, but he's just a little undersized for what I would like at the position. Addison is weird. I'm not sold on Jordan Addison. USC receivers to me are probably the biggest hit or miss over the last 5 years. I've never been sold on Michael Pittman as a fantasy weapon. Granted, that's partially due in part to the fact that the Colts can't roster a quarterback for more than like 6 months at a time. But Jordan Addison scares me. Out of this class, out of the 4 guys at the top, I do not want shares of Jordan Addison. I could be totally wrong, but he's 5'11", 173 pounds with 4.5 speed. Nothing screaming to me where he's going to be an immediate difference maker. And at best, I think he's maybe a wide receiver too on maybe a playoff team. I just don't see the high end upside of a guy like that.
I see him as kind of a blend between Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Lockett, but not as much upside. Like I said, he's pretty handily my 4. He scares. He doesn't do anything particularly well. He's not bad at anything. Like, I think he profiles more as a slot guy than anything. That's where he's best by far. And I'm pretty sure, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think that's where he spent the majority of his snaps in the slot at USC. Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember what he did at Pitt, but I feel like he was primarily a slot receiver. The one for me that I think could be the biggest mover above him. I don't see anybody else from the lower tiers jumping into the top 4. Cedric Tillman on my list. That's the guy I'm really keeping an eye on. I think just based on his size and speed, the NFL might really fall in love with him. And if he goes in the second round, which I'm hearing is possible, I think he could really even move ahead of Jordan Addison and maybe Quentin Johnston. He's really good. And the only reason Jalen Hyatt is in this conversation anywhere as a draftable receiver is because Tillman went down and Hyatt got a shot to produce. I think Tillman was the better receiver all along and still is in Tennessee.
That was the fun thing that I saw in your top 5, just because a lot of being a Chargers fan over the last 6 months has been like, go for Jalen Hyatt round 1. And I'm like, I just don't see it.
He's a one-trick pony.
Yeah, he's got burner speed, and outside of that, he's not giving you a lot of what you're really wanting. And it's not even burner speed. You're in a 4.4. Granted, there's not a whole lot of like tangible, like, oh my God, 40 times from this year's draft class. They're all pretty much in the same area outside of JSN and Quentin, who didn't perform at the combine for the 40.
No, and that's, since you bring it up, I'm glad you brought it up. That was the difference for me. I just did an article. It was a head-to-head comparison on Johnston and Addison. And in the end, Addison won by 1 point, but I still prefer Johnston because despite the fact that he's much bigger, and you would think Addison would be faster, they ran the exact same 4.59 40 time. So it was a 4.59 or 4.55. Either way, it was passable, but nothing burner. But if they're going to run the same speed, give me the guy who could be an outside receiver instead of just Addison, who's a slot receiver and isn't really as shifty or fast or anything as JSN. JSN is the safest by far. It's not even close.
Yeah. But another receiver that I actually really like in terms of like, he's not going to be a top 5 guy in this class, but depending on the place where he's drafted and the fit of the team that he goes to, I like Trey Palmer a lot. I think he's probably the fastest guy in this class by a bit. And at the NFL level, speed kills, and especially if you can get him into one of these like high-powered NFL offenses. Because if he has the right quarterback, he's going to get thrown into space. And that's all it's going to take. If his hands are sure enough, he's going to produce at the NFL level. So I like Trey.
Sorry, go ahead.
I like Trey Palmer a lot. I think depending on where he's drafted, he's somebody that I'm not only going to be trying to target in Dynasty, but even redraft. Because especially if Trey Palmer somehow made it to a place like KC, or if the Chargers drafted a Trey Palmer, if he's paired with any of like the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks, I'm going to have him on my roster in some form or fashion, just because of the allure of maybe he can break out. Aside from Cincy and then also Philadelphia, because Philadelphia doesn't throw it enough to my liking toward Trey
Baltimore.
Palmer. Baltimore could be interesting. I think KC and Buffalo are some dream scenarios for Trey Palmer, but there's even some lower tier cities where I wouldn't mind seeing him. Trey Palmer in New Orleans with Derek Carr, I think, could be interesting as like a wide receiver 3 that they've been searching for since before Michael Thomas's first injury.
I
Like,
think I think I have him at 9. He's another one, like I said. He's in that second. It's placeholders. That's why I don't really have
yep.
rankings before the draft. 5, Tillman's 5. He's 9. 5 from 12. 5 to 12. It's going to be shaken up. My 5 to 12 right now will not be my 5 to 12 in 2 weeks. And Palmer could be. I don't see Palmer jumping into the top 5. I think his ceiling's probably 7 for me. I also like Tyler Scott out of Cincy. He's got burner speed. So that's another one in that probably. I think I got the top 10 at receiver of guys that I could see as being fantasy relevant. And not all, I don't think there's going to be, I think maybe JSN and maybe one other will be a top 12 receiver. I think there's a lot of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s in this class, which would be great for your team. If you're in need of that stud, JSN is your only option, or hope you get the one of the other 10 guys that hits.
Yeah, this receiver class is not the 2021 class by any measure. It's not even the 22 class.
No.
It's incredibly talented, but the talent that is there tapers off at a pretty steep clip. I just think for me in this receiver class, I'm not mad about having a lot of these guys on my rosters, but I think for my rosters, especially in Dynasty, if you're not getting JSN, I'd much rather kind of beef up on running back and those guys where I'm going to plant my flagpole. And I think there's tons of value after the Jordan Addisons of the world. I think Josh Downs is going to be compelling to NFL rosters, and especially that group of guys where it's Jalen Hyatt, you've got Mims, Scott, and Trey Palmer, these burner type receivers. Because the thing about fantasy for me, and you don't get points for return yards and all that fun stuff, but depending on your league, you could get points for return touchdowns, depending on who your commissioner is. And a lot of the times, these guys that don't have this top equity in drafts, but can stay on rosters because of their returning abilities, I just think you can kind of have a long play with some of those guys. They might be a long shot now, but if they're able to stay on a roster and build rapport with their staff and the quarterbacks, at some point, I feel like they're bound to actually kind of hit. Whether it's maybe a wide receiver 3 season one year or a flex play type season. I just think the upside baked into these like speedy return type guys is higher than a guy that you think is the better receiver right now, but who knows how long they can actually stay on an NFL roster.
It's such an interesting class because there isn't that one receiver that does everything well aside from JSN. It's kind of like, this guy's really big, or this guy's really fast, or this guy's a great slot receiver. Even if you look at the size, nobody's really skinny and short. Nobody's really big and tall. It's kind of, he's 6 feet tall, but he's 170 pounds, or that guy's 5'10", but he's 220, or, it's really a mix of kind of like with the quarterbacks, even the running backs. This is really a case, a draft class full of, guys with a high amount of potential, but who are definitely flawed. There are very few perfect prospects in this class, and just a lot of, you decide which flaw you're most comfortable drafting out of all these guys, because there's no safe picks this year. I think you're going to see more first round busts in rookie drafts than ever before.
I think a big thing with this draft, which won't really impact dynasty drafts in the way that somebody would want, I think this draft is going to be heavier defensively in the first round than we've seen in years past, just based upon the level of talent. I think we're seeing more outlier type prospects on the defensive side of the ball this year than we have in years past. Anderson, Carter, Tyree Wilson is getting buzzed in the top 3. Defensively, there are just better prospects across the board this year than in years past, because That's the biggest thing. Year over year, we're looking at outliers at positions, and offensively, there's truly only one outlier by definition, and that is Bijan Robinson, because every other
Yeah.
position group truly has a contemporary for your top spot, and even after that, you go from 2 all the way to like 6 in these groups. You could shake them however you want, and that's gonna be the story of this draft. There's not going to be a sure thing outside of Bijan Robinson. And
No.
if you hit on Levis, if you hit on Stroud, if you hit on Addison or Johnston, you're going to feel good about it. But there's no definitive confidence in anybody outside of maybe the top receiver and the top running back. And for fantasy purposes, I think it's going to make for a really fun year. We're going to see somebody that wasn't drafted highly kind of break out before maybe the top dude kind of cements his place.
Right now you see people are saying it's a really deep year, and you've got all the way through to the third round. You're seeing potential, players in rookie drafts all the way to the third round. I think fantasy managers after the draft are going to be in for a rude awakening because, like you said, I think you're going to see 12 of these guys cut right off because a lot of these mock drafts, they're assuming, 3 out of the first 4 picks are going to be QBs and 4 in the first 10 and 5 first round quarterbacks and this and that. I don't think it's going to be anywhere that high. Like, I even think you could see, like we were talking about earlier, Houston could pass and go defense. I think you're going to see a whole lot more defense going than you would really expect. And I think there's going to be a lot less offensive players, and the pool of draftable offensive players is going to be much shallower than we think it is right now.
Yeah, no. For me, I would have to agree that this draft is probably one of the deeper ones that we've seen over the last couple of years, but it's not deep in the way that we would like it to be. This is not a very deep fantasy dynasty draft year. This is going to be a great draft for the NFL as a commodity and as a league, because genuinely, I've done numerous mock drafts for my favorite team, and I find myself looking at their big boards, and I'm like, this is insane that this guy in this class is so low. And I keep finding surprise players at spots where I personally wouldn't expect them just based upon name power alone. Like, this is a very recognizable draft class from top to bottom of players that you're going to see get drafted. In terms of fantasy, though, I just don't see a lot of guys that can come in and be instant impacts like we've seen over the last couple of years. There's not going to be 3 possible wide receiver ones in this class from the rip. Bijan might not even be an RB1 this year. Would I be surprised if he is? Would I be surprised if he is? Not at all, but it's not a guarantee. I'm not going to say he's going to have a better rookie year than Saquon had at this point. And whenever he's drafted, we'll know if it's a great situation. But Bijan could become the lead back in a committee. Who knows how it's going to shake out? And with the quarterbacks, realistically in this class, seeing is believing. There is no, like you said before, there's no Joe Burrow. There's no Trevor Lawrence. And even with a Will Levis, the biggest thing is, like, people compare him to Herbert a little bit. I'm a little shyer on Levis because of Herbert's body of work at Oregon. I just feel like Herbert did more, and granted, it was the Pac-12 and not the SEC. Yeah. But he had production before he made it to the NFL, and he still had the frame and this just Herculean size at the position.
But
so,
go ahead. Quarterback, but it's quarterback. Even if there was a Burrow or a Herbert, they weren't the QB1 in their class. Who was? Was that Trevor Lawrence's draft class?
No, so Burrow was the one in his class.
Oh, Burrow was the one. Okay.
Yeah.
But even the one I was going to say was Trevor Lawrence was a generational quarterback in the consensus one. Yeah. He was unplayable for fantasy as in year 1. So even if Trevor Lawrence was in this class, I don't ever like relying on rookie quarterbacks, especially in redraft.
Yeah, 100%. I bet my biggest thing is this dynasty draft. For me, if I were a manager, I personally don't think I'm drafting to compete with this dynasty draft.
Yeah.
I'm going with the guys that I believe in the most and the guys that I think should last the longest in the league, as well as probably have the safest floors, but also bake in some ceiling. I think this is not the draft where you're taking your big swings. You're not going to get the Jamar Chase. There is no Justin Jefferson in this class, aside from JSN.
Yeah.
But wherever he's going,
I don't think he's a Justin Jefferson now.
Exactly.
Chris Olave maybe, or Garrett Wilson at best.
Between those two, I'm assuming at this point, and I'm not even super high on Garrett Wilson currently.
No, me neither.
I like him, but I don't love him. I need to love the quarterback before I can truly love the receiver option. So yeah, I think this is not a class where you're going to build your contender. This is a class where you're going to fortify your floor. And so draft accordingly. If you like who you like, take them. If you don't like who you you're going to know where you stand before the draft even starts in this class, essentially. We've went over our top fives. It's a lot of the same, but in the same time, we value them differently based upon how rosters are going to flesh out.
But it's a build for the future class. It's a, pick a couple of these guys, leave them on your taxi squad or leave them on your bench, play them where you have to, and wait for them to develop. I don't think there's, aside from, Bijan or JSN, and even them depend on landing spot, none of the quarterbacks, nobody else. This isn't going to be you walk in and it's like you said, rookie year Saquon, rookie year Joe Burrow before the injury. I can't even think. Oh, rookie year Justin Jefferson. That's not going to happen. You're not going to get any of these huge blow up years from any of these rookies. These are more of this is good for a team rebuilding who wants to a couple of years to get moving in the right direction. This is a good class for that contender who finished third or fourth or even second and is looking for that one piece to put them over the edge or over the top this year to win it. This isn't the class because you aren't picking high enough to get Bijan or JSN.
And in terms of the contenders, I think there is value for this class because I think there are certain guys that I kind of have determined as flagpole type prospects.
Yeah.
If you are in a contending position, you're pick 12, pick 10, pick 11, pick 10 or 12, depending on the size of your league. If there's a chance for you to kind of reach for some of these guys that you believe in, Jameer's going in the first round, so you're not going to have the shot at Jahmyr Gibbs. But if you think Tyjae Spears is going to be able to break out of the backfield, if you believe in Roschon Johnson in the long run, you're going to be able to solidify your floor with younger talent because that's the thing about this draft and how deep it kind of goes. I think in college, players are getting more talented faster, and they're becoming younger and younger coming out. So like you and I have alluded to, you're not winning your league in this draft. If you do, some things are going to break in a weird way. But all in all, I'm just excited. I'm excited for the actual NFL draft. It's going to make Dynasty far clearer. But in terms of your offensive outputs, you're looking for flex. You're looking for weekly flex plays out of all the skill guys this year, aside from Bijan. And if one of the running backs break out, congratulations, you might have an RB2.
For the contenders, though, I find if you're drafting, 11 or 12, I find the strategy is probably just to trade down. I mean, I feel like there was a huge cliff at 10. It's starting to be filled a little bit because you've got Hooker, Charbonnet, Zay Flowers moving up a bit. But if I'm drafting 11 or 12, I've got a group of players that start at 11 and go all the way to the end of the second round that are all bunched pretty similarly. So I'd rather just trade that 112, trade it down for the 203 and a future second or a future third, and you're probably going to get something comparable.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's it, whoever you're going to get at 112 isn't going to be noticeably better theoretically than whoever you would get at 203. So if I'm a contender, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking to, take more dart throws, maybe get me an extra third round and hope for one of the, day 3 running backs that has some upside and I could use later in the season.
Yeah. And then I also feel this is going to be a fodder type draft. You're going to be able to get guys at values that I think they could return better value than we expect this rookie year. And you can flip them for future assets if somebody's really trying to make a push. And so this draft the story of this draft will not be told on draft day. It probably won't even be told by midseason next year. I feel like this is the draft where you really see the benefit or the loss on it 2-3 years down the road. Because it's going to be a slow burn and the results are going to be even slower depending on who you're drafting. But
for sure.
Aaron, I appreciate you for coming on. It's always a blast. And it was
thanks for having me
to finally make your acquaintance. Do you have anything you're working on? Anything that you'd like to plug before we get off of here?
Oh, I'm all over the place. catch my written work at the League Winners, King Fantasy Sports, Player Profiler, and DLF. My rankings are on Fantasy Pros. You can find me on Twitter and any social media, Instagram, etc., Reddit, blah, 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 at FF Mad Scientist. And you can catch my Mad Science Lab show nightly at youtube.com/FF Mad Scientist. It's also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm currently doing a nightly My Guys episode, dropping every night until the draft, with a different analyst saying their 3 favorite My Guys from this class. And then we'll be transitioning to something after the draft. Thanks for having me again. It's nice to get in with you. And after meeting Austin, I think I did one with Austin, now one with you.
Yeah, well, as always, we appreciate you for stopping in by the Makeshift Managers podcast. And thank you to Tyler for hosting us on his platform. It's always a great time getting to come on Wednesdays. And to everybody that watched and listened, thank you for tuning in. And Aaron, we're going to have to get you on an episode with Austin and myself one of these times coming up.
Sounds good. Anytime. Just let me know.
Sounds like a plan. And now I'm going to go to the final word of the day. And if you've tuned in before, you know it starts with a P. So from Aaron and I to everybody else, peace. Peace.